Topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter with me. A little bit later, Jeremy Dice will be joining us, and we'll be looking at all sorts of different issues over the next couple of hours. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Of course, you can also leave a comment on Facebook, because we also broadcast on Facebook Live. And Penna, Dexter, you've been busy, but it is great to have you back.
It's really good to be back, Kerby. I miss so much that it feels like a year ago that I was here before. The news just keeps rolling along so quickly, and there are so many issues that really concern us.
Well, we will get into some of those, and we will spend a fair amount of time, as we always do with Jeremy Dice, talking about religious liberty, but I wasn't going to wait an entire hour to get to this. And that is, there are a lot of people that I would not trade places with, and somebody that's at the, if you will, bottom of that list I would not like to trade places with is Jack Phillips. This is the Colorado baker who, after winning a case before the Supreme Court, has now had the Colorado Civil Rights Commission come after him again. What about this?
Well, it's unbelievable. And, I was reading about it today in the Wall Street Journal, and in the Masterpiece Bakery case, it was really decided on animus by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. They majored on that. It wasn't his First Amendment rights to bake or to refuse to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. But Justice Elena Kagan wrote a concurring opinion in that case, saying the state would win the next time if it disguised its anti-religious bias. Colorado appears to be taking her invitation, because there's another case. They haven't filed a lawsuit against him. He's filed one against them, because their Civil Rights Commission is now taken up a complaint by a man, Mr. Scardina, I think is his name, who says he's a transgender and he wants a cake with a blue exterior and a pink interior to celebrate his sex change.
Coming out.
His coming out.
Yes.
And of course, I think he came on an amazing day. Was it the day that the Masterpiece decision was handed down, or some important day for Jack Phillips? He came and brought that.
Came in
request.
Hours after it was reported the Supreme Court would hear Jack's case.
Yeah.
So here they go. That's when it happened. Yes.
But
okay.
the thing is Colorado has taken it up.
Yes.
Taken up the matter, and so Alliance Defending Freedom has. I think they're trying to be very strong and proactive, and they're coming back and suing Colorado over this, because, it's just unbelievable. But, the thing is if they're trying to come back like Elena Kagan said, and, let's try from a different angle. They're not trying from a different angle, because to do this so quickly does show animus and unbelievable persecution against Jack Phillips.
And again, we have to recognize that many of the decisions on religious liberty to 5-4, this one was a 7-2, so that you did have a few individuals that would be identified as liberals going along with what was said by Justice Kennedy because of the animus. But that, I think, illustrates the point. And, of course, it's obviously a setup. That's what our friend John Stone Street points out in terms of when it happened and the call went in and all the rest. But again, the commission can kind of get away with this by saying, okay, 2 points. Number one, we won't show animus this time. And number two, this is different than baking a cake for a same-sex wedding. This is for a person that wants to come out with their sex change. And so they can, I think, pursue that. And you can understand why Alliance Defending Freedom is dealing with this issue as well, because they just know that was about the logical next shoe to drop. And here we are with Jack Phillips in one way or another under the microscope once again in Colorado. And all he wants to do is just do what he does every day, bake cakes and cookies and things like that, and be a gracious individual. And yet each time they've targeted him for, in this case, what looks like an obvious setup.
Yeah, I think that it was a 6-year ordeal getting to the victory at the Supreme Court for Jack Phillips. And he's got to be exhausted. I think he's in his 60s now.
Yeah.
And, you know, his business has suffered. And so for this to happen again, to me, it's just out of the realm of reality. I mean, really, that they would even take this seriously.
Well, again, that maybe just shows you the desire on the part of this Civil Rights Commission there in Colorado. And when people were talking about the animus, we've read over the air some of the things they said before, and so we will see. But nevertheless, this is, again, something which was a setup. Of course, it was the way the phone calls were handled and all the rest were just an attempt to simply make his life miserable. And you got to feel for an individual like this who didn't get into this to be part of the culture wars. If anything, he's probably the least likely person to be a culture warrior. He just wants to express his creative abilities in a very small cake shop, and yet they seem to, for one reason or another, targeting him.
Yeah, it got smaller because he stopped doing wedding cakes. He had to. Just who made the request? Well, it looks like, and David French points this out at National Review, that the same person has been making requests, just kind of outlandish requests, because about a year ago, a caller asked, he wanted a cake that would feature an image of Satan smoking marijuana. And we think this is the same guy. There was another one, an upside-down cross under the head of Lucifer. That was another one. And then there's another very nasty one that was requested that I can't even mention on the air.
Well, again, just want to encourage our listeners, if they haven't heard about this, there have been all sorts of pieces. You've got the David French one, which I was tempted to post today. Of course, we had one the other day. And then, of course, there's one by John Stonestreet. Almost everybody's writing about that. And, of course, our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom also have a piece that came out today, but it was on some other issues. So I'm sure they'll post one as well. So, again, those are some things that you can find on our website, pointofview.net. And, you know, when we come back from the break, I want to get into some of the possibilities for the House of Representatives and the Senate. These are some things we've talked about even yesterday with Kathy Ward, who you happen to know, and you got mentioned a few times yesterday along the way. But we also now have some facts and figures that really suggest that it's quite likely the Democrats might indeed control the House of Representatives. But at the same time, it's also possible that Nancy Pelosi would not be the Speaker of the House. So we'll come back from the break. We'll get into some of those particular cases. But if you go to our website, you'll see our second article there has to do with a forecast of the House midterm elections. And then the third one there is about whether Nancy Pelosi will be the next Speaker of the House, even if the Democrats win. So we've got some things to talk about.
Yes. You know, it's been traditionally moderates that have run away from Nancy Pelosi, or at least during their campaigns, they would hint that they might not vote for her as the leader of their party. But now it's also the left. They're saying she's too moderate. Yeah. That's where that party's gone.
And when you had some in California that were saying we want to replace Dianne Feinstein because she is not liberal enough, it just shows you how everything is doubling down. I saw a piece that surfaced with the man from Queer Eye who was saying, you know, there are racists in the Republican Party, and Trump is a racist, but not all Republicans are racist, and we need to come together and come up with a compromise. And boy, the blowback that he got, but he just doubled down and said, wait a minute, if we can't compromise with people that maybe we slightly disagree with, there's no future for this country. And it was just interesting to just see the number of email comments afterwards and Twitter posts that were just vilifying him for saying, you know, not every Republican's a racist, and maybe we need to come together. Nope, that was too much for too many people to see. So we'll be right back, right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Addiction is hard to escape, whether we're talking about drugs and alcohol or gambling or a variety of other addictions. Dennis Prager says one of the hardest addictions to escape is the addiction of getting something for nothing. The addiction he is talking about is the entitlement addiction. He reminds us that we have lots of people voluntarily giving up drugs, alcohol, or gambling, but we don't have many examples of people giving up their addiction to entitlements. They are alluring. Giving up cash payments for food stamps, subsidized housing, and free or subsidized health insurance is very hard to do. Liberal politicians know this and thereby enable the behavior by making it relatively easy to obtain and fairly hard to quit. Often the withdrawal symptoms are too much to handle. Dennis Prager says that there is another reason that entitlement addictions are hard to break. It is unique among addictions. Very few drug and alcohol addicts believe they are owed drugs. Entitlement addicts, on the other hand, believe that society owes them every entitlement they receive and often more. If you think about it, the word entitlement sends a message that you have a right to a particular government benefit. So there's a moral component involved in this particular addiction. And I might mention that many of the callers to my radio program hate that Social Security and Medicare are called entitlements because they rightly point out that they paid into the system. Entitlement addiction is also hurting the economy. The financial cost is significant. The amount spent on entitlements in the last 50 years is nearly equal to the U.S. national debt. And the social cost of putting many generations in a position of dependency on the government will have long-lasting effects. That is why it is hard to break the entitlement addiction. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention some of the things we're going to talk about over the next couple of hours. We are going to look at our second article that we've posted here on the forecast for the House midterm elections. We had a little bit of that conversation on Wednesday. Nick Pitts and Chelsea Human talked about that, and even yesterday, Kathy Ward and I talked about it. But, of course, we have Penna Dexter here, and, of course, there's some other issues that we can put on the table that we did not discuss before. And a little bit later, we're going to get into a couple of other issues. One of those is a piece by David French, revoking John Brennan's security clearance raises constitutional concerns. And some of you have called in about that, so if you want to join our conversation, that is one. Later on, we also have an article here on Omarosa has maybe 200 tapes. Some of those taped in the Situation Room. So, again, some of you have had some comments about that as well. So if those issues interest you as well, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212.
I am very curious to see what our listeners think about those things.
Yes.
Both Omarosa and also the Brennan revocation of his security clearance.
On Wednesday, we got quite a number of phone calls. We got even a few yesterday, so we'll see what we get as we go along. But let's see if we can focus on the House race for just a minute. Because, Penna, I've heard a lot of people say, well, I think it's a coin flip, 50-50, whether or not the Republicans retain control of the House or whether Democrats take control of the House. Now, we recognize that any mid-year or midterm election or off-year election, oftentimes the party out of power makes gains. Well, if you start going and looking at the various House districts and ask the question, what is leaning Republican, what is leaning Democrat, what is toss-up, This estimate says there's probably almost a 75% chance, a 3 in 4 chance that the Democrats will win the requisite number of seats. That would be 23. This one says it could be the Democrats win as many as 35 Democrat seats, and that becomes a very different situation for President Donald Trump if indeed he has a Democratic House, and let's just assume for a minute he has a Republican Senate. And so you can still, with the Republican Senate, still begin to confirm some of the nominees to the court, which we can talk about later a little bit with Jeremy Dice. But the House would be very different, and I think we know what would happen in the House if indeed it was controlled by Nancy Pelosi or Steny Hoyer or whoever else ends up controlling the House of Representatives for the Democrats.
You know, one of the things I think of, if you're talking issues with this, is Obamacare. Of course, the House failed to repeal Obamacare, and they haven't even really passed anything to limit Obamacare or, undo some damage. But President Trump has been reversing things coming out of the Department of Health and Human Services. There have been some, ways of offering new policies now, the temporary policy, for instance, the co-ops for the businesses, so different ways to make it more affordable. And, of course, that all needs to be enshrined into law in order for it to stay past this administration. And so if Democrats happen to win the presidency next time. So none of that will happen if the Democrats stay in control of the House. So that's just one thing. I mean, they say they want to reverse the tax cuts. They say they want Medicare for all. I don't think none of this would be signed by the president, but you wouldn't get anything else positive coming out of the House, really. And so, I see this by Nate Silver in 535, 74.6%, they say, yes, chance the Democrats will win control. I mean, others, I've heard others like Karl Rove has said, well, yes, it is looking like the Democrats will take over, but it's 3 months out and a lot can happen. And this is just so volatile in many ways. And he is saying that, and I agree, the Democrats have moved so far to the left. They are so out there that people answer polls one way, but when they really start thinking about the agendas and of course, there'll be a lot more ads and things like that, explaining what some of these positions are. The unaffordability of something like Medicare for all, for instance. Everybody's experiencing benefits from the tax cuts. They want to reverse it. So I don't know. Mm-hmm. I just, this to me is one of those unmeasurables beforehand here. And I think it behooves people who care about the direction of things right now, some of the positives that have happened, to get involved in their House members' race, especially if, that person's at risk of being ousted and you like them, then, you better help them. Or if there's somebody out there better that you like that's conservative, then you need to help them.
And again, you mentioned Medicare for all. One of the things that we always appreciate when we have Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio, and he was last week, is to go back to that Mercatus study, which says that if you did really have Medicare for all, it sounds real good, but it's going to be more like VA for all, because there are a lot of hospitals going to say, look, if you're going to pay us 40% less than we're getting right now, we're just going to stop doing this. We'll just take private insurance. And doctors are going to say, I'll just stop practicing medicine. So pretty soon the government's going to have to take over some things. And again, the cost, more than $32 trillion. That's with a T. We have a $20 trillion national debt from George Washington through Barack Obama to now Donald Trump. But this would be $32 trillion, almost $33 trillion. And just if people think about that one, and then again, look at some of the others that you've mentioned. Abolish ICE. That is a commentary that I've got coming out next week, is something that was just floated 5 years ago by a few people on the fringe. And now it's probably going to be actually a platform of the Democratic Party and would be one of the initiatives that would be no doubt put through by the House. You have, of course, a couple of others. Guaranteed income, national income. You've got, I can't do all this with a straight face, but I'm trying. $15 an hour minimum wage. and college tuition, free college tuition. So right off the bat, I would think somebody that has just even a little bit of economic background is going to have to ask the question, how in the world are we going to pay for all of this?
Yeah, I know. It's we are not teaching our students the differences between capitalism and socialism. And so, and, you know, most of them have not. I mean, a lot of the young people that are coming up now, and the millennials, did not know what it was like to look at what our enemy, the former Soviet Union, was like. And so, in a sense, they've got this unrealistic utopian view, and everybody wants something for nothing. So that appeals to a lot of people that, I have to say, they're not thinking it through.
Yeah.
And it's sad, and I don't want to be I don't want to unduly critique people, but in politics, it's very important to think things through, and especially to count the cost.
And even if you don't know Russia, and again, that's been my argument in our little brochure that we have on capitalism and socialism, that they, the older generation, those of us that are baby boomers or builders, you know, think of the Soviet Union. But even if you're younger, you're thinking of Venezuela. I'm at the Texas Rangers baseball game last night, and one of the outstanding hitters there, they put up, he's from Venezuela. And somebody next to me said, well, I bet he's glad he's here. Don't you know? I mean, if you want to begin to understand what socialism can do to a country, Venezuela is an oil-rich country. One of my former secretaries at Probe, her husband used to go to Venezuela all the time to develop oil. But once Hugo Chavez took over, they just, you know, completely kicked all of these people out of the country. And even though it is sitting on an enormous amount of wealth, oil development, just try to even get toilet paper right now in Venezuela. Just try to eat well right now in Venezuela. And to say this does not work well. Think of Cuba. Think of other places which you and they always like to look at Sweden or Norway. And there's a good piece that just came out recently saying, well, you can't pick that because they use the free market to actually give them the income so they can redistribute the wealth socially. So even that isn't a true socialist economy. But with Medicare for all, the Mercatus study and others have said the only way you'd even come close to paying for it is to double the personal income tax right now, double the corporate income tax, and then Alexia Ocasio-Cortez was looking at this. She's an economist. She actually has an economics degree, and said, yeah, and we'll probably also have to do some other things like cut the defense budget and implement a carbon tax. And again, if anybody's just thinking this through, they're going to go and destroy the businesses and the economy that's booming right now. Yeah. And that's
not to mention that. Look at other countries that really have a national health care system, which that's what Medicare for All is going to make us.
Yes,
a single payer type system. And just look at, like, in Great Britain, they weren't able to address their flu epidemic because they didn't have enough doctors.
So again, these are decisions that people will be making. Matter of fact, these are decisions you will be making in these upcoming midterm elections. So we're going to take a break. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Again, 1-800-351-1212. We'll also talk about revoking John Brennan's security clearance, Omarosa, a lot of other issues on the table as well. If you'd like to join us, we'll take those phone calls right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter in, and in just a few minutes we'll have Jeremy Dice joining us. We'll look at some of the religious liberty issues. But Penna, this thing about John Brennan's security clearance is important. And so I wanted to at least post a piece that I won't completely agree with, but I just have such respect for David French. I quote him so often. I mean, it's hardly a week go on where I don't quote him at least once or more, sometimes in one of my commentaries. And he says revoking John Brennan's security clearance raises constitutional concerns. And we've talked a little bit about that. Just to give a different viewpoint, I'll just hold this up for people to see. This is one which Elizabeth Vaughn wrote. John Brennan's CIA operated like a branch office of the Hillary campaign. So there are political reasons, certainly, to be expressing about that. And the other day, I actually read the piece that came out by the president, who said, not only am I revoking his clearance, but I want to reevaluate why we just allow people to continue to have clearances. And so I may be on the different side of David French, but I've always sort of said, I don't care if you like somebody that's been in office and has a security clearance, let's say Condoleezza Rice, why do they get to keep it afterwards? Well, the theory has always been, well, you may need to consult with them, so they may need to have security clearance. Okay, I get that. But most of the time, within a year, that's kind of an old news. And in the case of John Brennan, nobody was consulting with him. So I think there's the small issue of John Brennan. There's the bigger issue of why we keep doing this that way in the first place. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, one of the points David French made about it was that when people become a private citizen, like John Brennan is now, it smacks of retaliation against a private citizen by a president. And that would be problematical, he felt. Mm-hmm. But, he's not just any private citizen. I mean, he's out there on MSNBC and NBC blasting the president, and also with his tweets and everything else. So that's one thing. I think, and David French says that the president's authority is not unreviewable. So now the president doing this can be challenged in David French's eyes. And that he's bounded by limits. That's another quote from David French. And really, he kind of seemed to say, I thought anyway, that it was fine that he revoked it, but he doesn't like the reason being the witch hunt.
Right.
There would be other reasons to revoke it. And, I agree with you that, why do people get to keep that once they're out of government? I would think it, in a sense, it should be automatic unless there's a compelling reason to keep it.
That would make sense to me. And again, let me give you the extreme here. On the one hand, let's all agree that sometimes, although we like what Donald Trump does, we don't like the way Donald Trump says it. So we all agree that this is partially the reason that David French was upset with that. And that makes some sense. I mean, how many times around this table have we said, we just can't believe that Donald Trump said that in a tweet? Okay, we got that. So that's one issue. But back to your other point, there seems to be an assumption that once I've served in government, I enjoy these privileges essentially for life. And I used the word privilege because I think getting a security clearance is a privilege. And if you do anything to abuse that privilege, I think it should be taken away.
Yeah, that's why I felt fine about Donald Trump revoking that for him. One of the things that could be done and should be done right now is just sort of brings up the necessity for the president to declassify all the documents under subpoena so that really Congress and everybody else can see them instead of, I think it would maybe tamp down all the rhetoric and maybe.
It's an election year. Hard to even say that anymore, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've kind of wondered why he hasn't done that all along.
Yes. So again, that's one of the questions I want to put on the table. Maybe you have some thoughts about that. But again, this is a kind of a 2.5-page piece that makes the case that even though the president has power, it's not unlimited. And so you can make a couple of cases. Number one, that maybe we should have some checks and balances. And I would certainly understand that. You could certainly make the case, and I just did a minute ago, that sometimes, although we like what the president sometimes does, we just roll our eyes sometimes by what the president says. But let me take one other extreme that has surfaced time and time again in the talking head shows, and that is this is a First Amendment case. And I'm going, no, it isn't. John Brennan has complete freedom to express his views as often as he wants, whether he has a security clearance or not. And the fact that that keeps being brought up, it's not a First Amendment issue. It's kind of like what people say, well, I have a First Amendment right to, in just a minute I'm going to talk about a First Amendment right, whether or not to take a knee.
What I say doesn't have consequences. Yeah. That's what they're trying to say.
Yeah, it shouldn't have consequences. In other words, I should be able to speak and not fear my security clearance. No, you have the freedom of speech and you have the freedom to express yourself in a lot of forums where conservatives aren't given the freedom to express their viewpoint, but that's another story for another day. But you don't live without the consequences of those. And so whoever that might be, if it were Condoleezza Rice criticizing Barack Obama, or if it were, I can't think of somebody right now in the Clinton administration criticizing George W. Bush, which, by the way, happened pretty frequently sometimes, and then they decided to pull your clearance, well, that's just the consequence of the privilege that you were given in the first place. But I think there's a bigger issue, and that is what the president was saying, and that is, why do we do this anyway? I mean, once you have a security clearance and have access to unbelievably confidential and classified documents, why, when you are no longer under any kind of governmental scrutiny, are you allowed to still have that clearance? I mean, there are just some questions that I appreciate somebody from the outside, like Donald Trump, coming in and going, why are we doing this? You know, whenever you bring a new person into a business, sometimes they say, why are we doing this? Or a new pastor into a church, why are we doing this? And people say, well, it's always the way we've done it. And he says, yeah, but maybe that's not
a good answer for Donald Trump. He doesn't like that answer.
I don't think he does either. So if nothing else, we posted that article here. And again, real quickly, Elizabeth Vaughn said that investigators have been primarily focusing on the roles of the Department of Justice and the FBI in the framing of President Trump for colluding with the Russians. But as the facts of the case are slowly revealing, it looks like John Brennan and his fear of Donald Trump might win the presidency may have instigated the whole collusion narrative. He didn't have to twist many arms to bring others on board, but his exhaustive search for dirt on Donald Trump and his insistence that the FBI open a counterintelligence investigation was key. And just the other day, there was an interview with Rudy Giuliani, in which he said, you know, it's amazing how many times when we get talking about these issues of collusion or investigation of the FISA report or of the various other kinds of issues that have been raised about fusion GPS and on and on and on, that they all go back to John Brennan. And so it's interesting to think about that as well. So, again, I don't think it's a First Amendment issue. And, of course, the other day you had somebody on one of the Talking Head shows show this. By pulling the security clearance, Donald Trump looks like those tin-horn dictators we see in third world countries. I don't think
he doesn't care. So we'd love to hear what people think about this. I mean, I know that you opened the phones on this before, Kerby, but the number's 800-351-1212. Since I wasn't here, I want to know what point of view listeners think.
I would, too, and we'll also do that in the next hour. But let me, before we take a break here, one of the other issues we put on the table was Omarosa. And while we're talking about security, you know, I've said before, Penna, that there are times when, during the break, we say, oh, it's too bad we didn't keep the microphones on because we had a really good discussion. But there's sometimes when we're at a break, we're glad we don't have them on because we're reevaluating whether we want to keep the interview going or maybe want to move in a different direction, or we, have to say, well, I think that one, we're done with that, and
it doesn't sound exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like, and that's always the case. And if I all of a sudden knew that every time I'm walking into a meeting, a microphone is there and somebody's recording what I'm saying, I'm going to be even more circumspect. And when now we have, as this article suggests, in thehill.com, which means it probably is true, that Omarosa may have as many as 200 tapes. There's got to be a legal issue here somewhere. What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, she was recording in the Situation Room.
Yes.
That's a national security violation. And, I mean, I think that there should be legal action against her for that, for doing that. But she's selling her book and she's releasing these tapes as she promotes her book. I mean, she's really, she's almost as brazen as Donald Trump, but, in a different way. And I am, I just hope it's one of the books of the week,
Yes.
Former administration officials coming out with it, profiting from their involvement, and that we move on from this. There have been others that said this could be the one that actually breaks Donald Trump. I don't think so.
Yeah, but we'll see. Anyway, we'll take a break, and we've posted some of these articles so you can read them to yourself. Of course, there was an article in the New York Times, this one from The Hill. I think it's kind of a good summary of that, and just a sense in which when you have somebody who gets their fame through a reality show and then later gets brought into the White House, I hate to be blunt, that's the possible fallback and blowback that results from some of that. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Two recent news stories converge to demonstrate how a fully functioning, vibrant economy depends upon a culture of life. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that job openings in the U.S. climbed to 6.7 million in the 3 months ended in June, the highest level since 2001. The number of unfilled jobs is growing in nearly every industry. The Journal explains that an expanding economy that demands more labor, combined with a historically low unemployment rate, has resulted in a situation where there just aren't enough workers in fields such as transportation, warehousing, and utilities. Combine that with a story summarizing a paper published in 2016 in the Open Journal of Preventative Medicine. National Right to Life posted the piece on its news site last week under the headline, "Abortion by far is the leading cause of death." A team of researchers from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte compared abortions from 2009 with other measured causes of death that year. Although abortions are not classified as deaths in U.S. vital statistics, these researchers considered them so, stating that the exclusion of abortion as a major cause of death should be a major concern to the scientific community and society as a whole. They found that induced abortion caused nearly 1.2 million deaths, almost twice the deaths attributed to heart disease, and more than twice those attributed to cancer. The National Right to Life story's author observed that abortion, unlike natural or accidental death, is intentional killing. So, when the Wall Street Journal reports that unfilled jobs are piling up, we have to conclude that we have taken the lives of workers we need in today's economy. Sure, some of these children, had they been born, would have ended up a net drain on the American economy, but most would have been contributors and taxpayers. With over 1 million abortions per year, we're missing a lot of workers. Shouldn't policymakers want to know? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and in the next hour, then we're going to have Jeremy Dice with us, and we'll get into a couple of articles, including one that he wrote on the Religious Liberty Task Force, which has sometimes been so misrepresented. I thought it'd be good to talk about it in a positive way. But those of you that listen online, and I know quite a number of you do, just now had a chance to hear Penna Dexter's commentary on missing workers. And over the last couple of weeks, if you've been paying attention, and I certainly have, Penna has really been writing about the fact that we've had kind of a baby boom, and then we had kind of a baby boomlet because we, in the midst of that, had a birth dearth. But even when you have this sort of baby boomlet of the millennials, it's not because the fertility rate has gone back up. It's been going down. It's just because you have this mass of baby boomers having kids that, by and large, we're facing, as you say, missing workers. The other day we had Van Taylor in here, and I love how he sometimes cuts through all the facts and just uses two simple ones. If we have an economy that's growing at 3%, and now we say it's growing at 4%, but we use 3% as the average of the last year, and the population isn't growing more than about 1%, you can figure out real quickly that we have a situation in which we have created more jobs than we have people to fill those jobs. Now, the argument, Penna, of course, always has been, well, that's why we need immigrants. And the right immigrants filling the right jobs, that makes sense to me. But there's a bigger issue. When you abort, what's it up to now, 60 million, babies, those are the workers that would be producing for the economy right now. So there are consequences of, in a sense, a philosophy that we have implemented since the 1970s of destroying the future workforce. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, and the other part of my story this week was that the abortion, you don't hear this because this is not officially stated, but it's the leading cause of death.
Yes, that's the other one.
1 million a year. So we're terminating, aborting our workers. So the economy needs the workers, so it hurts the economy. And also, you said, okay, the numbers of children of baby boomers are still growing, even though the birth rate is shrinking. But this massive balloon of baby boomers retiring now.
Right.
Year after year, more are retiring. And so you're seeing the struggles with Social Security and Medicare. And we've aborted people that would have been contributing to that.
Right.
And, Chelsea Clinton this week talked about how
yes, here we go.
Killing 61. This article from National Right to Life says 61 million.
Yes.
Or it's from Life News. So it's caused she says that it's helped the economy.
Oh, I know.
And
because it allowed you women to go out and work.
It allowed women to go out to work. Now, there's a lot of people refuting that, and that's probably a discussion to have another time. In fact, maybe I'll do a commentary on that. But
I think it'd be a good one.
She says that since Roe, it's added abortion, Americans aborting these babies has added $3.5 trillion to our economy. That she can just stand up there, number one, and say that because it's so callously, it sounds like a transaction almost.
Yes.
That's one thing, but she's wrong. That's another thing.
Well, and it was interesting to listen to that. I took the time to listen to it. I don't recommend it for the faint-hearted, but it's amazing, first of all, how her voice sounds so much like her mother. So it's almost like you're hearing Hillary Clinton say that. But more to the point, it illustrates something I've said for years when I've gone to these pregnancy resource centers, that we used to see abortion as kind of the worst case scenario, something that we only would have to do in the most extreme circumstances. I remember doing a debate years ago with an abortionist, and he said, this is the lesser of all evils. Women don't choose to get pregnant and abort their children, and so this is something we have to do just to protect them. Okay, so even he, as an abortionist, said, it's kind of the lesser of two evils, the worst scenario, but better than allowing these women to go through a full pregnancy. Okay, now we are starting to see, in a number of ways, turning it from the lesser of two evils to the greater good. And that is, first of all, with the fetal tissue material, that maybe we can take these aborted babies and actually improve the quality of living of somebody else. Now, when I heard Chelsea say that the other day, I thought, here's another argument. The other one was kind of a medical argument, that we can use these aborted babies to improve people's lives. Think how that would change the dynamic a little bit. But here to actually say, because we've aborted these children, of course, she doesn't call them that or anything like that, women have been able to be in the workforce, and the workforce has blossomed in ways that it never would have before. And in every case, it's almost like the pro-abortion groups are trying to figure out a way to take what used to be called the lesser of all evils, and a very difficult,
even her father, making it safe.
Yeah, safe, legal, and rare.
Legal and rare.
To now just saying, actually, it's the greater good. And so that's something else that comes from that piece. So can't wait to see the Penna Dexter commentary on that one.
If you're a feminist, I would really sort of critique and disdain that comment too, because feminists are seeking ways to thrive as mothers, at least many of them, as mothers in the work, in the society, in the culture. But to say that in order to really have a career and do well, you have to abort your baby?
Yeah.
Pretty sad.
Well, again, just one more issue that kind of gets back to these midterm elections. Somewhere along the line, it's going to occur to people that are voting that I'm not sure Social Security and Medicare are going to be here. And when you talk about Medicare for all, and it's nearly bankrupt now, and Social Security isn't working because we had at one time 10 workers for every one recipient. Even during the 1980s, it was still like 5 workers for every one recipient. Then it got to 3 to 1, and pretty soon it's essentially going to be 2 to 1. And then when you also, of course, something that doesn't have relations to the issue of abortion, but certainly is relevant as well, people are living longer. You know, when in 1935, Franklin Delano Roosevelt implemented Social Security, you know, most people didn't live past the age of 65 for more than a few years, if that. But now 8 out of every 10 Americans zooms past the age of 65. We have thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of centenarians. Those are people that are 100 years of age or older.
So they're not working for like 2/3 or a third of their life.
Yeah. And again, when, you know, there's been such resistance on the part of Democrats to maybe move the age of retirement up a little bit from 65 to 67 or 68 to maybe change some of the, and of course, you see what happened to George W. Bush when he tried to make that a big issue back in 2004. So, again, those are some things that people are going to have to pay attention to in terms of the vote. And, again, some of this we can't change because once you've aborted those children, they're not coming back.
Yeah, you can't bring them back. Yeah, this is one area where Donald Trump has not spoken the right position, I believe, and Social Security doesn't want to touch it.
No, and what's so interesting, and that's another piece for a discussion in the future, but some people have said, you know, when you really get down to it, sometimes the rhetoric of Donald Trump is more extreme than the reality. I mean, he really hasn't addressed some of these issues like entitlements at all, and yet still look at some of the situation we find ourselves in. Something just to pay attention to.
That's why we need a Congress that will.
I think so. And if nothing else, back to one of the articles, which we'll get back to a little bit more once Jeremy Dice joins us, is the forecast for House midterms. And what does that mean? Might even give you a preview. The next Outlook magazine actually has 2 articles. One on what does it look like if the Republicans lose control of the House but still retain control of the Senate. But then another article, what if they lose both the House and the Senate, and what does that look like in some of those pieces of legislation that Penna, Dexter, and I were talking about. So if you haven't already signed up to receive that and are a giver to the ministry, a donor to the ministry, we certainly encourage you to do that. And, of course, you can do so by going to the website pointofview.net. And as you do so, you're going to find a lot of articles, many of which we are going to work our way through in the next 2 hours. But we need to take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice, and of course Jeremy is with First Liberty. Penna Dexter, of course, has her commentary today, which we'll get a chance to hear a little bit later. And we're going to talk about religious liberties, you might imagine, the Religious Liberty Task Force, and one of the cases that First Liberty is dealing with. Also, one of my articles here, we've posted, again, a forecast for the House midterm elections. Let me go around the table and see what that might be, as well as one from the Hill, in which Nancy Pelosi, if indeed the Democrats do take the House, and there's, according to some people, a 3 in 4 chance of that happening, they can't necessarily assume that Nancy Pelosi will be the next speaker. A lot of defections, not just from the moderate Democrats, but sometimes because she's not liberal enough. Can't make this up. And then we want to get into some of the issues we've talked about earlier in the week, the revoking of the security clearance of John Brennan. Are there some constitutional issues? David French says that there are. Omarosa may have 200 tapes of interviews. And before it's all through, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Loved watching him play basketball. Not sure I like some of the things he said about NFL kneeling, but we'll get to those issues a little bit later. One of the things, Jeremy, that we've talked about before is the Religious Liberty Task Force. You had a chance to attend that with Kelly Shackelford. I wanted to revisit it, one, because you have written a very good article about it, but two, because I still see all sorts of comments being made that this is all about Jack Phillips. By the way, an individual finds himself once again on the opposite side of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and it isn't about religious liberty. So educate us a little bit on this whole issue.
Well, look, it was all about religious liberty, and let's not miss the historic nature of this thing. I keep on reminding people about this. This is the first time in American history that a sitting Attorney General of the United States has dedicated an entire day to going over the issue of religious liberty, having a summit inside the Department of Justice, in the Great Hall there inside the Department of Justice. That's unprecedented. And, of course, that stems from President Trump's efforts with executive order. That was followed up by Attorney General Sessions' guidelines. And this task force is just one more outgrowth of that. The reason for this task force, as I say in the article, is to institutionalize this commitment to religious liberty across the cabinet, across the executive agencies. Some agencies aren't following those guidelines. And so the task force is designed to go into those agencies and say, hey, by the way, did you see what we wrote in this memo? You might want to follow that, because Congress passed this law, and your responsibility as executive department here is to follow that law. So how you doing with that? What are you doing to make sure you're protecting religious liberty within the Department of Labor? And guess what happened last Friday? Department of Labor came out with some new guidelines concerning contracting with religious organizations. Right. Very good guidelines, very important guidelines that are going to help out a lot of different folks that are doing really good things in this country that happen to partner with the federal government in the process. They were before, under the Obama administration, just simply barred from even participation. Now they're welcomed in and say, hey, look, if you're here to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and house the homeless, hey, partner with us. It doesn't matter that you're religious. We want people that are going to be willing to care for people in this country. Your religion that motivates that, that's fine with us, as long as you're going to do the things that we need to have happen. So there's more things that are popping out of this. But what I saw at the task force, at the summit there in D.C. a couple weeks ago, was just this wonderful cross-section of America, where you had people who were dedicated to you had a Jewish rabbi who spent months, years, actually trying to build a synagogue right there in a city in Florida, and the city just kept giving him the runaround. Well, there's a law on that. It's called RLUIPA, the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, that prevents cities from using zoning laws to specifically keep religious organizations like churches, synagogues, and other houses of worship out of the public square, out of their town. But that's what that town was doing. You had a Sikh representative who has just been, the stories he was telling of his community being bullied in this country. I mean, goodness gracious, you may not be an adherent to Sikh, and you may have some good objections to that particular religion, but nobody should be treated like this. No one should be abused for having their religious beliefs and trying to exercise. This is America, where we protect that right. You had Muslim representatives talking about the abuse and the Islamophobia that's real and it's out there. So this was a great cross section of America. A Catholic priest spoke. You mentioned Jack Phillips was there. Others. Look, this, and then in the crowd, don't forget that, you had a huge amount of people from across the ideological spectrum sitting there applauding General Sessions and his top brass, who were all in attendance, at this summit. In other words, the United States government, which started with the promise that you're going to be free to exercise your religious beliefs, through the Attorney General's office, as directed by the President, is living up to that promise. And that's a great thing for liberty.
You know, Jeremy, I mean, religious liberty, of course, is enshrined in the Constitution, but we've had to shore it up with various laws and things. I think that one of the big areas where it's been attacked is the weaponization of the Obergefell decision, the idea that we have same-sex marriage now, and that's used against people. It deprives people of their livelihoods, even in many cases. And so we've seen arguments over that. Was there any discussion of that issue as an issue? Sure. I mean, that was a part of it, but there was, and that is an issue, of course. And we've got the Aaron and Melissa Kleins, as that case is going on right now still, and we're going to be appealing to the Supreme Court shortly on that. But there are so many other issues that are out there, and I think that's what the summit was trying to give some attention to. You had the land use issue, you had the bullying issues that the Sikh community was facing. You know, we just sent a letter yesterday to a senior center in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I mean, the facts of this case just will knock your socks off. Here you've got an 86-year-old resident of that community who's a semi-retired pastor, and he's holding a Bible study in the privacy of his own home. And the community there has given him an eviction notice that if he continues to hold this Bible study there, he'll be homeless. They view it as a business entity of some sort by having a Bible study with 15 or so friends in the community there. I mean, goodness gracious, that's a fair housing violation, a very clear violation of federal fair housing laws. And we expect that community to clean up their act, and I mean right now, or else we're going to have to apply the law to them as well.
And again, I might just mention that article is there as well. A retired minister who is actually threatened with being evicted simply because he's using his home to hold a Bible study. I mean, again, like I said, you can't make some of this stuff up.
No, and not only was it the home he was in their home because they couldn't use their community room.
Right.
Well, why couldn't they use their community room? Well, the organization first said, yeah, you can do it. Then they had a little bit of pushback. Some squeaky wheel was there, so they put some grease on it. And they said, look, you can hold it here, but we're not going to list it on the calendar of events as a Bible study. You have to refer to it as a book study. You can't call it a Bible study. And then they up and changed the rules. They just simply changed rules. And now no religious purpose is allowed in that community room whatsoever. Now, you can have a funeral there. You can have a birthday party there. You can have a wedding in the community room, which is just interesting. You got all aspects of life there, births and weddings and deaths, all that can be happening in your community room. But in all of those events, you cannot pray. You cannot do any type of religious purpose in that community room. So that in and of itself is a grotesque violation of the federal fair housing laws. In fact, that very fact pattern is on the Department of Justice's website as indicative of religious discrimination in housing. So, I mean, I don't know why we've got agencies or private organizations like that are simply willing to push aside common sense, frankly, but also the Constitution and our protections in the law that are in addition to the First Amendment, as Penna pointed out, to make sure people have the freedom to be able to freely exercise their faith.
Right there in Fredericksburg, Virginia, of all things. We have that article there as well. We'll come back and get into a couple of other issues and finish up some of our comments about religious liberty. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Addiction is hard to escape, whether we're talking about drugs and alcohol or gambling or a variety of other addictions. Dennis Prager says one of the hardest addictions to escape is the addiction of getting something for nothing. The addiction he is talking about is the entitlement addiction. He reminds us that we have lots of people voluntarily giving up drugs, alcohol, or gambling, but we don't have many examples of people giving up their addiction to entitlements. They are alluring. Giving up cash payments for food stamps, subsidized housing, and free or subsidized health insurance is very hard to do. Liberal politicians know this and thereby enable the behavior by making it relatively easy to obtain and fairly hard to quit. Often the withdrawal symptoms are too much to handle. Dennis Prager says that there is another reason that entitlement addictions are hard to break. It is unique among addictions. Very few drug and alcohol addicts believe they are owed drugs. Entitlement addicts, on the other hand, believe that society owes them every entitlement they receive, and often more. If you think about it, the word entitlement sends a message that you have a right to a particular government benefit. So there's a moral component involved in this particular addiction. And I might mention that many of the callers to my radio program hate that Social Security and Medicare are called entitlements because they rightly point out that they paid into the system. Entitlement addiction is also hurting the economy. The financial cost is significant. The amount spent on entitlements in the last 50 years is nearly equal to the U.S. national debt. And the social cost of putting many generations in a position of dependency on the government will have long-lasting effects. That is why it is hard to break the entitlement addiction. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to stay on the issue of religious liberty for just a few more minutes, but then I want to get into the question of John Brennan's security clearance, something we've talked about briefly this week. But again, David French says it raises constitutional concerns, and since we have Jeremy Dice here, we'll certainly talk about that. Penna, Dexter, we've been talking about religious liberty in the general sense with this whole idea of the Religious Liberty Task Force. Then we look at this specific case, and it seems like every time we turn around, isn't it another one of these senior centers or retirement centers where we are having to educate people about the fact that religious liberty really does exist in this country?
And Jeremy, that's what you at First Liberty, you do that, and that's the first step, is usually to write some sort of a letter that's very strong, laying out the legalities of the situation, and often that does the trick. If it doesn't, though, now that this task force is met, now that there's just some official, I don't know, it's supposed to make an atmosphere of religious liberty in the country.
Yeah.
So, I mean, do you think it will?
Well, yeah, look, I think so. Number one, what are we talking about? Right? We're talking about religious liberty right now. So at least we're having that conversation over, I don't know, 1,000 or more stations across this country right now. And listeners sitting down tonight at dinner time saying, hey, what did you do today? Said, hey, I listened to somebody talk about religious liberty on the radio. Well, that'll spur even more conversations. And that's going to spur people on, I hope, to be able to be confident in their exercise of their religious beliefs. Look, there's always going to be bad actors. And that's why we have laws, is to make sure that people are kept within those guardrails, if you will, of the legal environment when it comes to all of our issues in our country, but especially of our civil rights. So we're going to, I mean, look, I love it that we never had any more murders in this country, but that doesn't mean we stop kind of modifying and correcting our laws on murder and how to affect those things. We tweak them, we make them better, we make them stronger, we do new things to make sure that people know what their rights are, know what their protections are, and that sort of thing. The same thing is very true here of religious liberty. Yeah, look, when, or actually I should say this, more importantly, when it comes to you and you have that problem and someone questions your free exercise of religion, whether you're a student and they say you can't talk about your faith in school, or whether you're a person of faith just trying to build a church down the street and they say, no, we you can't do it for this XYZ reason, although we're going to allow similar groups like yours here. Or maybe you're a person of faith in the military that is having a problem there. Wherever you're finding that and you're challenged by your religious liberty, number one, do you know what your rights are? Well, I hope so. Well, go to firstliberty.org. We can teach you a thing or two about that. And you can download a lot of resources there to teach you a lot about it. But number two, when you have that problem, when you have the community room being denied your use, except that they can use it for a funeral and a wedding and all that sort of thing, but not your Bible/book study, if you've got an issue like you're a chaplain in the Army and you're told you can't, that you're going to be court-martialed for failing to conduct a marriage retreat, things like that, or you're speaking at graduation, or you're doing a school assignment that references your religious beliefs. Well, look, we can help you with that. And the problem is that if we don't deploy these defenses that we have, if we don't use the laws that Congress has passed, that weakens the First Amendment. It creates more of a mess of our Establishment Clause, our free exercise jurisprudence. It gives the courts less opportunity to correct those errors and make sure that our civil rights are well protected and vindicated. So I'm proud of Ken Hauge out there in Virginia for being willing to put his name on the line here to say, look, this is not right. There are a lot of people, all my clients, I'm just so stinking proud of them all for being willing. I mean, Joe
because
Kennedy,
you really could sit back and take it.
Yeah, look at Joe Kennedy. I mean, that guy's been beat up in the press for doing what he didn't have to lose his job. He could have just walked off the field and not done anything. But he stood up and said, no, this isn't right. And it's not just about Joe. And he knows that. It's about other coaches all over the country. Now, look at who he's got. He's got Bobby Bowden saying, hey, look, this is a good thing. You should keep on doing it. And the more you have people doing that, that's how these things happen.
One area you mentioned is the military. And I noticed in your article you talked about how this religious liberty summit that happened to sort of send a message across the government. And one area where the message really needs to be sent in a uniform way is to the military because, as you mentioned, General Mattis, sometimes it seems like he actually didn't get the message. But the military is huge, and there are violations across the military, and then there are great, godly, religious people serving. And so to send this, I don't know, this kind of stamp of approval or this support of this just respecting religious liberty across the government and the military is really important, isn't it? Oh,
it's vital. Look, just this week we had a story come out that a general, I believe he's a general, he used to be a colonel, but I think he's a general now, that has this website he maintains called Lunchtime Prayer for the Nation or something to that effect. And there's an activist group that is kind of a gadfly in these issues. They sent
you mean Mikey Weinstein?
It could be. They sent a letter to the Pentagon saying that this guy needs to go to jail for daring to pray for the country and operate a website while he's in uniform or something like that. And this is a very compassionate human being and somebody who's doing a good thing for our country, and yet this guy wants him to be thrown into jail for daring to have this ministry. That's not right. We've had POW MIA tables that have been taken apart because on there is not only the empty place setting, but a Bible representing the faith that was so precious to the people that lived in the Hanoi Hilton for so long. You've got a lot of different things like that. And I referenced earlier to the Chaplain Squires case where you've got, Chaplain Squires, go to firstliberty.org and look at this case because it's remarkable where he removed himself from a situation he was not allowed to be a part of. And for that, he's being recommended for court-martial and potential jail in the military prison. But when we looked at the actual file of the investigation, the second investigation that's now been done on Chaplain Squires, what we found is that the investigator intentionally left out statements from his superior officer as well as the chaplain who replaced him that exonerated him. That clearly said he did the right thing at the right time and in the right way, according to military policy as well as the Southern Baptist Convention's own requirements of him as their endorsing agency. We had to send a letter to the Secretary of the Army to say, hey, look, there's something going on in Fort Bragg where you've got an investigator who's refusing to provide evidence that would prevent this chaplain from going to jail. That's not right. And so this Religious Liberty Task Force is designed to go into those agencies and kind of hold their hand and pull them towards the laws that Congress has duly passed so that they would abide by those and enforce them within their own ambit.
I might just mention, too, that you can go to First Liberty and find out about the story about Chaplain Scott Squires, but also Casey Griffin, which I think is one of the most egregious ones of all because she was just the deliverer of the message, right?
That's it. Yeah, she just passed
Is that fair?
She took in the application and said the chaplain will want to talk to you. And for that, she's been denied the opportunity to go to college, to go through ROTC in college, which means that she would have a free ride. And she would come out not as a staff sergeant that she went into, but as a commissioned officer in the United States Army. This is a very prestigious program, a very selective one. And for this budding African-American female soldier not to be able to go through it is just terrible. And that is only because General Sontag down there at Fort Bragg, he's the one that has said that, no, I'm not going to remove the flag off her file and let her go forward. He could have just said, no, I'm not going to validate this concern at all. She can go forward into the Green to Gold program and get that college degree. He just refused to make a decision. So while they're at firstliberty.org, they should find the petition we have there to encourage General Sontag to correct this situation and end this witch hunt into both Chaplain Squires and his assistant.
One other thing we did mention, I think we mentioned it even last week, is that we've got some opportunities for some of these coaches, since you mentioned Joe Kennedy, to actually go and we got some games coming up pretty soon and go to the 50-yard line. And maybe somebody take a picture of them praying. Wouldn't it be great to have a montage of all these coaches around the country that say, we're going to do the same thing Joe Kennedy did?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And do it just like Joe did. And that's pretty important right now. Go to the 50-yard line after the game is over and your coaching responsibilities are done. And just like Joe, take a knee in silent prayer for 15 or 30 seconds. That's all you're doing, and that's it. And if you get any kind of trouble with the school district and you follow those rules just like that, come talk to us. Go to firstliberty.org, click on the Get Legal Help Now button. We want to help you out.
And you can get a T-shirt. I saw that down there as well, and you can sign up for that and all sorts of things.
I have one of those T-shirts.
Oh, there you go. So, again, that just we're in football season, so I'm thinking some people are going to say, well, I can wear that shirt to the game because I'm not a coach, so I can't actually do that. But a coach can go out there and do that.
It's funny. I got a text message from a former client of ours, was a football coach as well. A picture of him with his arms around two of his players wearing his Coach Joe Kennedy shirt today. I got it just today. It's a great shirt. Go pick yours up at firstliberty.org.
Well, and again, they are kneeling for prayer. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about those who are kneeling during the national anthem. That's a different issue. And if nothing else, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has an interesting comment about that. So we'll get that in just a minute. But when we come back, since we have our lawyer here, are there constitutional concerns about the decision by President Donald Trump to revoke John Brennan's security clearance? And so we'll put that on the table. That's one of the articles. By the way, the first article is on the Religious Liberty Task Force. A little bit further down, you'll find the article by David French on John Brennan's security clearance and revoking that. So we've got a lot more to cover. If you'd like to join us at any point, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those calls in just a minute. Penna, Dexter, and Jeremy Dice with us today. It is our weekend edition. And one of the articles we've posted, Penna, is, again, revoking John Brennan's security clearance raises constitutional concerns. David French's been on the program with us before. I'll quote him favorably so many times. Not so sure I completely agree with this one, but that's okay. I want to give people a chance to think through what has been happening. And when indeed you have individuals that leave government service and they retain their security clearance, the argument was, well, we need to be able to consult with them occasionally. But in the case of John Brennan, it seems like he's spending most of his time criticizing the president. I don't think anybody's going to consult with him. And so in an unprecedented move that has been criticized by many, he decided to revoke the security clearance of John Brennan. What's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, some of the reason he gave the reason that he was sort of the genesis of the witch hunt, quote unquote, Trump's words. And David French doesn't think that's a great way to sort of give a rationale for it. But Trump revoked Brennan's security clearance. For one thing, Brennan is a paid contributor to NBC and MSNBC. So he's not really a consultant, and he doesn't even pretend to be. He also had evidence that they were interfering on behalf of Hillary Clinton, which he kept from Congress back when he was at the FBI. He was one of the chief architects of the narrative that Russia was interfering in the 2016 election to ensure Trump was elected president. So he was, I mean, a lot of people are saying that he's the one that was really the one that sparked the whole Mueller investigation. And so, you know, fine and dandy, but just some of his tweets now and his comments calling the president a traitor, basically saying his activities with in Helsinki at a press conference were treasonous. I mean, I don't blame Donald Trump for revoking the security clearance, and I kind of wonder why people get to keep them.
Yes.
Anyway,
that's a good question.
Unless they have a real reason to, you know, maybe you could make an exception, but to have this blanket policy, I wonder about it. So, you know, I mean, I see David French's point, and sometimes I wish President Trump would, you know, be more circumspect in his explanations of what he does, but that's just not him.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's get the constitutional concerns. First of all, I want to set one aside. I don't think anybody believes that this is a First Amendment issue. I've been hearing this all the time. You know, John Brennan is free to exercise his freedom of speech, whether he has a security clearance or not. So I don't think that's an issue. But what about separation of powers and some other things? What's your thoughts, Jeremy?
I think David makes some good points that this is probably a poor plaintiff to try to challenge some of these things, and that both sides need to be kind of careful in this situation. Yeah. Truthfully, the first thought I had with this whole situation was going back to my memory of Sandy Berger years ago shoving documents over the National Archives in his shorts to try to get out of the try to steal him with that. Did he ever get his security clearance removed? I don't know, but that was my very first thought. Look, I think the president has got to have some confidence that the people that have security clearance are going to be using them for the best interest of the country. So I think there's a legitimate concern there. The reason that they retain their security clearances, by the way, of course, is so that if something happened under Brennan's tenure and that kind of reemerges during the current administration, he can quickly come back in and provide guidance and say, well, this is what we did, this is what we thought at that time. You don't have to go back through that whole rigmarole to make sure that, I mean, getting a security clearance is no small thing. You have to really go through a big process. So it's quick, and it helps us with our national security on things. But, you know, there are other people that they could talk to. Frankly, I think both sides are making this a bigger deal than it needs to be, because that's where we're at in our society right now, that we've got to be apocalyptic on everything we talk about. It's the end of the world on both sides, and it's not. It's an important issue. It's not an ultimate issue. We ought to be very careful about who gets our security clearances, whether they have the character, which is a concern in security clearance language. Do they have the character to maintain their security clearance or not? But at the end of the day, the president has got to have somebody he can rely upon to provide that correct guidance. If the president is, in fact, using this as some sort of political payback of some sort, that's unacceptable and is not the kind of thing that we expect out of our leaders. But neither do we expect people with security clearance to always maintain them. It is a will and pleasure of the president kind of an idea, so that's okay. I
call them a privilege, you know, and you can lose your privilege, right? You say that to your kids probably every day. Right.
So the president's brought up James Clapper and also former FBI Director James Comey, and also NSA Chief Michael Hayden, all, you know, out of the administration now. And it's almost like a little threat that he's made, that he would revoke theirs too. Do you think that's appropriate?
Well, and there's a point in which you just start having to ask the question, why do they get to keep them? And we've already sort of twice explained why. But at the same time, to keep them in perpetuity is one thing. But as you pointed out, Penna, just a minute ago, here's another piece by Elizabeth Vaughn. It says, as the facts of the case having to do with the so-called Russian collusion are slowly revealed, it's looking like John Brennan and his irrational fear that Donald Trump might win the presidency may have instigated the entire collusion narrative. He didn't have to twist many arms to bring others on board, but his exhaustive search for dirt on Trump and his insistence that the FBI open a counterintelligence investigation were key. The other day, Rudy Giuliani said, every time we investigate this, whether it's Fusion GPS or whether it's the FISA warrant or whatever, it all goes back to John Brennan. So, maybe there's a reason for that. We'll see. But again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. And again, we wanted to give you kind of a point-counterpoint. So this piece by David French, I think, raises some important questions. And you would expect him to do so because David French actually thought he might even run against Donald Trump. So he's, if there's a never-Trumper in the group, he certainly fits into that category. Let's take some phone calls along the way, and we'll go to Arkansas first, KCMH. Rick, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Well, my subject is dropping back just a little bit, but you mentioned it earlier. I do want to say I appreciate your show, and I listen regularly.
Thank you.
Mine is about the kneeling during the national anthem.
Sure.
Those are professional athletes. They're paid. So in my opinion, they're just like when I'm at work, and I have a code of conduct. So when I'm wearing a uniform or a shirt and driving a truck with a company name on it, there's certain things I might not do because it wouldn't be pleasing or acceptable to my employer. So if my employer wants me to stand for the national anthem while I'm on the job, I'm going to do it, whether I agree with it or not. And I don't understand why there's a constitutional case about this when they're at work. They're supposed to do what's expected when they're at work.
Yeah, well, again, let's talk about that for a minute, Jeremy, because we recognize that sometimes there are requests made at a workplace that could violate somebody's religious liberty. But at the same time, when you're working for the employer and they say, look, I don't want to cross, you can keep it under your blouse or your shirt, I think that's reasonable. And if they say, look, we're paying you millions of dollars, we're asking you to stand for the national anthem, I think that's a workplace issue, isn't it?
Look, Title VII comes into play, especially when it comes into the areas of religious liberty, religious employment, or faith in your employment, or gender and race and age and that sort of thing. This one kind of spans that world, kind of.
Yeah.
But the term in Title VII is something that employers need to keep in mind, which is called they have to provide reasonable accommodation. I think what you're seeing right now in the NFL's policy of saying, hey, you can do it in the locker room or you can stay in the locker room while the anthem goes on, that probably is the best thing in terms of reasonable accommodation. I'm not sure that they're under an obligation necessarily to do that, but I do think employment lawyers in general would say that's probably your safest world to be in because you don't want to have a lawsuit that tries to implicate something like this, that you've engaged in religious discrimination and your in your employment status. That's a bad place for employers, NFL owners to be in. The same thing is true of your code of conduct, Rick. And if you happen, for instance, to not be able to work on your Sabbath day or something like that, the company is not required to keep you employed per se, but they are required to reasonably accommodate you. I mean, if that's going to be, if you're the only truck driver for the company and you got to get the milk to the houses that day, that's going to be a significant undue burden on them to say, well, just take that day off. But if there's a way that they can accommodate your religious beliefs, they're required to do that. And that's a good thing for us to have in the private employment context, so that the spirit of the Constitution is being upheld through the employment law context.
Going back to the NFL, the NFL has a policy, but you have various teams signaling that they're going to do various things. So it's going to be interesting this year.
I would think so. When we come back, I'll read the comments by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was actually doing a review of a couple of movies that have come out, The Black Klansman, Spike Lee, as well as Sorry to Bother You. But he pretty much, if I can summarize it, and I'll read it so you can see it yourself, said that requiring NFL athletes to stand during the national anthem is comparable to what actually happened during slavery, in which the slave owners required the slaves to sing while they were working. So it's been a bit more controversial than that, and just an illustration, again, of the difficulty we have of bringing everybody together on any kind of issue. I can see we have calls on security clearance, on Omarosa, and everything else, so we've got a lot to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Two recent news stories converge to demonstrate how a fully functioning, vibrant economy depends upon a culture of life. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that job openings in the U.S. climbed to 6.7 million in the 3 months ended in June, the highest level since 2001. The number of unfilled jobs is growing in nearly every industry. The Journal explains that an expanding economy that demands more labor, combined with a historically low unemployment rate, has resulted in a situation where there just aren't enough workers in fields such as transportation, warehousing, and utilities. Combine that with a story summarizing a paper published in 2016 in the Open Journal of Preventive Medicine. National Right to Life posted the piece on its news site last week under the headline, "Abortion by far is the leading cause of death." A team of researchers from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte compared abortions from 2009 with other measured causes of death that year. Although abortions are not classified as deaths in U.S. vital statistics, these researchers considered them so, stating that the exclusion of abortion as a major cause of death should be a major concern to the scientific community and society as a whole. They found that induced abortion caused nearly 1.2 million deaths, almost twice the deaths attributed to heart disease, and more than twice those attributed to cancer. The National Right to Life story's author observed that abortion, unlike natural or accidental death, is intentional killing. So, when the Wall Street Journal reports that unfilled jobs are piling up, we have to conclude that we have taken the lives of workers we need in today's economy. Sure, some of these children, had they been born, would have ended up a net drain on the American economy, but most would have been contributors and taxpayers. With over 1 million abortions per year, we're missing a lot of workers. Shouldn't policymakers want to know? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, and we are again involved in our weekend edition. Penna Dexter and Jeremy Dice with us, and most of our callers want to talk about security clearance, but since the last caller, Rick, just mentioned the NFL, if you haven't seen the piece, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, great basketball player, but my goodness, some things he says, and this one is certainly going to generate all sorts of Twitter comments, opens with a quote from Frederick Douglass, who's an ex-slave who turned an abolitionist, who said, "Slaves are generally expected to sing as well as to work." And so, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar says, to the slave owners, singing slaves would drown out their own cruelty and oppression, clothe them in a coerced choir of decency. But it wasn't enough that the slaves had to sing. They had to sing their oppressors' feel-good songs that were summed up in the Porgy and Bess refrain, "I've got plenty of nothing and nothing's plenty for me." So then he goes on, he said, currently the song being demanded is the national anthem during football games. But during a warm-up game on August 10th, despite President Trump's previous condemnation, several Eagles players kneeled during the anthem or raised their fist. their way of singing their own song. To them, lyrics like "Land of the Free" don't accurately represent the daily reality of people for color. They love their country, but they want their country to recognize the suffering that occurs when it isn't living up to its constitutional promises. So that, I'm sure, will generate some response over the next couple of days. But let's go back to some of you that have a security clearance and maybe can educate us on this issue. Larry in Georgia, I think you have a clearance, so what's your point of view?
I do. I currently hold a top secret clearance with a sensitive compartment information. And the thing that I think most people aren't realizing is that you are given those when you are handling certain types of documents and information. And if you have an individual that is no longer employed by the president or the administration, and that would be the sponsor, then there is no need to extend and allow those individuals to hold those clearances because they will not be fed that information any longer. So when everybody gets upset that Michael Hayden and those individuals have lost it, those individuals are no longer being fed classified data, and there's no need for them to hold their clearances. There is another interesting term called a Yankee White. And those are clearances that are given to people directly working for the president and the vice president. And if you're not working directly for the president or the vice president, then you do not need to hold those clearances.
I think you made a very good point.
Let me ask one question. So, the point is made that you might have to go back and explain a situation that took place under when you were, for instance, head of the FBI or the CIA or whatever. And so you could still do that even if you didn't hold the clearance because it wouldn't be new information?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for instance, if an individual, like you said, a director of a CIA or the FBI has certain information and that clearance is removed, and now a year from now they're called to talk about that, yes, they can talk about it because they were granted a clearance at the time. And what they would do is that they would get a clearance from the FBI or the CIA saying, I have been called on to give testimony or an explanation, and I just need the permission to do that. It's just not a big deal.
Interesting.
Well, Larry, I appreciate you calling in today and sharing that with us.
Thanks. Y'all have a good afternoon. Nice listening to all of you. Have a good weekend.
Appreciate you educating us on that. And I want to jump ahead to one other individual, I believe a retired Air Force individual who has comment on security clearance as well. So Larry in Indiana, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for taking my call. Yes, I spent many years in the Air Force, and I had various security clearances throughout. The individual that just spoke kind of took my thunder. After a person ceases employment, in this case with Mr. Brennan, he can be asked, and he can provide information to anyone with the appropriate security clearances. You just cannot absorb. You cannot receive the information. So, and further, it's not a constitutional question here because the president is granted that authority to withdraw security clearances from anyone at any time for any reason.
Commander-in-Chief, I would think. That fits pretty well. Right.
Exactly. Plus, we have to remember that Mr. Brennan's past performance of him
Yes.
looking into the records and of people in the government, and
There
all
you
he had to do 2014 Ms. Feinstein statements, and his withhold and direct lies that he had to admit to later.
Again, this one by Elizabeth Vaughn is a good illustration. John Brennan's CIA operated like a branch office of the Hillary campaign. And, of course, that's just another viewpoint there as well. Just before we run out of time in this segment, let me go. So we've posted an article here about the fact that Omarosa may have 200 tapes. That comes from The Hill. And John in South Carolina, WLPG, wants to address the issue of Omarosa. So you have the floor. What's your point of view?
Yes, sir. I feel like our current administration is not discriminating when it rejects any kind of security clearance for someone because of whatever their race or gender or whatever, and it just seems like that we have lost a sense of trust when we're dealing with individuals who have a security clearance And for someone like Omarosa, who became friends with the president and, you know, had the security clearance and was able to get into that secret place and hear what she heard and then record things, I mean, that is really a gross perversion of using a position like that to gain trust and then violating it, you know, and it's a personal attack. It really seems like a deep state undermining of the president to try to portray him as a racist or some kind of a bigot or someone who is not fit to be in office. And that just seems like a trend in this country now. There is such a gathering together of organization of people to try to undermine the president and his character. And I truly believe Donald Trump has changed as an individual and has grown as a Christian since he has been in office.
Let me give everybody a chance to speak to that issue. I think there may be some kind of legal action against Omarosa. Don't you think, Penna?
If it isn't, I will be so shocked because she went into the Situation Room, taped it, and now she's making things public. Or anywhere that she would tape things going on in the White House. I don't know the legality, and so Jeremy needs to speak to this.
But and how did she get the clearance in the first place?
I'm still over here wondering why we hired somebody from the reality TV show to be in.
Me too. That's on the president.
Yeah. I think that's my greater concern than all the rest of it. I think the rest of it will work itself out. I mean, if she brought in a recording device into the Situation Room, that's a problem, and somebody's going to get in trouble for allowing that to have occurred. Maybe it's Omarosa. Maybe it's somebody who's at the door checking for those types of things. I don't know. That concerns me that would even be a possibility right now. But
wow, yeah.
Goodness sakes, this is it's reality TV at the White House right now on these things, and it shouldn't be that way.
Well, we say this every once in a while. You can't make this stuff up, and I did not see this one coming, but nevertheless, that's in the news, so we did want to mention it. Now, when we come back from the break, you know, if you've listened to this program, even just yesterday and other days, we try to every once in a while tell you about really wonderful, life-affirming films. So we're going to have a chance to talk with David Cunningham for a little bit. Penna is the one that helped us make some connection with him, and it will be something to know about his particular film called Running for Grace, and then some others coming out in the future. So we'll spend a little bit of time on that, and then we have so much more to cover, which we have not covered, some of which we've already alluded to. Of course, we've yet to even talk about the midterm elections and a couple of other issues, so that will all be covered in the next hour. If you would like to read on some of the issues we've talked about, they're all available at our website, pointofview.net. Weekend edition, we'll be back with more right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, and again, if you have been paying attention to some of the things we've been talking about over the last couple of years, we really like to feature some time and attention on films that are going to really affirm your faith and your Christian commitment, and ones that are just well done and deserve attention. So we're going to spend a few minutes there, and then we'll get back to some of the issues. In the last hour, of course, we talked about the Religious Liberty Task Force. We talked about the issue of security clearances. We're going to get into some other topics in just a few minutes, but we wanted you to know about this new film, Running for Grace, one that you can see in the theater or on demand. And it is put together by David Cunningham, who joins us by phone, an international filmmaker, born in Switzerland. His family moved to the Hawaiian Islands, a graduate from the film school at the University of Southern California. And this family film, Running for Grace, Matt Dillon, Jim Caviezel, Ryan Potter, and other films that he'll have coming out in the future are certainly an opportunity. And Penna, Dexter, I wanted you to do the honors because you helped us connect up with David Cunningham.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here.
Well, you know, I mean, I look at your background, and your dad is Loren Cunningham, the founder of Youth with a Mission. And so, in a sense, I know you've had an upbringing that has honored and glorified the Lord. So you went into filmmaking, and I'm sure there's a story behind how those two go together.
Yeah, you know, I have this incredible legacy of 7 generations of ministers and missionaries on one side of the family and 4 on the other. My great-grandfather started 13 churches out of a covered wagon in Tulsa, Oklahoma area.
Wow.
And my great-uncle was a POW in World War II in China because he stayed with the church that he planted there and sent his pregnant wife in the last Red Cross boat out of there. And my parents started Youth with a Mission, YWAM. So I grew up in this context of seeing the world, amazing people doing amazing things in a hurt and broken world in many places. And I felt from a young age that my calling was to influence popular culture and to engage with the same family legacy, but on that platform.
Well, tell us about this current film that's really out this weekend. I actually got the opportunity to watch it last night, and it's beautiful, Running for Grace. What was the genesis of that particular story and film?
So, yeah, I have 3 kids, and we often wrestle over the remote at night of what we're going to watch. And my girls want to watch the romance, and my wife the comedy, and my son the adventure. I was like, I would love to make a movie that my whole family actually wants to watch. It's not only safe for them to watch it, but that they want to watch it. And this movie is set in the 1920s Hawaii, in a time when there was segregation, and actually there was a law about racial integrity where children of mixed ethnicity were not legally able to be adopted. And this is a story about a young boy who's half Japanese, half Caucasian, who's rejected by both sides of the communities. And Matt Dillon plays a plantation doctor that comes to town and takes him under his wing. And the two of them take on the social segregation and various obstacles of the time. There's a romance theme to it, and so on.
Yeah, and the beauty of the movie is striking. Absolutely incredible.
Oh, thank you. You know, I live in Hawaii and grew up there and kids born and raised there, and this is the third movie for me to make in the islands, and I really wanted to take the audience to places that they probably have not seen before in Hawaii, and to a place as well, a time and a place, I should say, that perhaps is unique and first time for them.
Yeah, it was also educational. Well, tell us about what's happening this weekend, because this is opening weekend for the movie Running for Grace, and it's in cities across the country, correct?
Correct. It's in theaters across the country, but it's also, if it's not near you, you can also get it on iTunes and download it there and other digital platforms. You can go to our website, runningforgracemovie.com, and see where it's playing and how to go about it. But something that's been really a real joy is we've been doing benefit red carpets across the country for families that have adopted and fostering families and those involved with youth at risk. And it's just been a joy to have these families walk the red carpet and be honored and celebrate the theme of this movie about the power of adoption.
Let me just mention real quickly that we do have a link to runningforgracemovie.com. You can go there directly or follow that. A couple of things. First of all, you can click on where you can watch it at home, and that is an opportunity for you to use all sorts of different ways in which to do that. Or then you can click on the one that shows a theater ticket to the theater, and I did that, and I've found that all sorts of places where we broadcast in 40-plus different states are places where you could watch it in the theater. The other thing that I would encourage people to do as well, David, is we have the trailer. It's about 2 minutes long, and I would encourage people to watch the trailer. And as they do that, then they could click that share button and put it on their Facebook page or something else. And then if they're really interested, I clicked on the behind the scenes, and then you can see some of the different scenes with, of course, we mentioned Matt Dillon, all sorts of scenes with Jim Caviezel and a variety of others, so that you can really get a sense about what the film is all about. So these are all important things to do, because on opening weekend, you want to get as many people to the theater or downloading it as possible, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just mentioned one other important thing on that same website. If you want to give the movie to an adopted family to bless them, there's a way to do that. We show you on how to do that, as we just want to celebrate these families that have stepped out and taken that really important decision.
Let me just mention, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I thought maybe for just a minute, David, if you allow us, I'd love to talk about some of the other films and TV programs you've been involved with. I think some people might say, okay, the name sounds vaguely familiar, but of course you had that World War II drama, as well as To End All Wars, the controversial miniseries that I think a lot of people know about, The Path to 9/11. And, of course, we're talking about this film, Running for Grace, but also Wind and the Reckoning. And, Penna, don't we have some others that are going to be working on in the future? So these are just some things that we just always like to highlight, because we, as he said, always have the kids fighting and the grandkids fighting over the remotes. And we say, can we watch something we really are interested in, and at the same time is life-affirming?
Yes, and that was one of the things that crossed my mind last night as my husband and I were watching this, David, because as I was telling Jeremy, I think it was Jeremy or Kerby earlier, that my husband always loves the action movies, but he really wanted to see this because he heard about you and how you had made this, and he thoroughly enjoyed it. And, of course, I did. I love the love story. I love the adoption theme, because adoption is such a redemptive message. It's really what Christ has done with us, his church, and his body. So thank you for making it, and we look forward to in the next segment finding out some of the things that you're working on next.
So we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with David Cunningham. If you find yourself saying, okay, I want to know more about him, I want to know more about the film, we have all those links on our website, pointofview.net. So we'll come back and spend just another few minutes with David Cunningham, and then get back into all sorts of issues in the news. Weekend edition, you can find all this at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Addiction is hard to escape, whether we're talking about drugs and alcohol or gambling or a variety of other addictions. Dennis Prager says one of the hardest addictions to escape is the addiction of getting something for nothing. The addiction he is talking about is the entitlement addiction. He reminds us that we have lots of people voluntarily giving up drugs, alcohol, or gambling, but we don't have many examples of people giving up their addiction to entitlements. They are alluring. Giving up cash payments for food stamps, subsidized housing, and free or subsidized health insurance is very hard to do. Liberal politicians know this and thereby enable the behavior by making it relatively easy to obtain and fairly hard to quit. Often the withdrawal symptoms are too much to handle. Dennis Prager says that there is another reason that entitlement addictions are hard to break. It is unique among addictions. Very few drug and alcohol addicts believe they are owed drugs. Entitlement addicts, on the other hand, believe that society owes them every entitlement they receive and often more. If you think about it, the word entitlement sends a message that you have a right to a particular government benefit. So there's a moral component involved in this particular addiction. And I might mention that many of the callers to my radio program hate that Social Security and Medicare are called entitlements because they rightly point out that they paid into the system. Entitlement addiction is also hurting the economy. The financial cost is significant. The amount spent on entitlements in the last 50 years is nearly equal to the U.S. national debt. And the social cost of putting many generations in a position of dependency on the government will have long-lasting effects. That is why it is hard to break the entitlement addiction. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Jeremy Dice with us. And again, as we look over this last week, of course, revelations from the Catholic Church, and even yesterday, 300 different news outlets criticizing Donald Trump for criticizing him. Of course, we talked about religious liberty. We're going to get into the whole issue of elections and security clearance and a variety of other things. But for a few more minutes, we have with us David Cunningham, who's a filmmaker. And again, we are tying him into this particular film, Running for Grace, which has just come out. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, or go to runningforgracemovie.com. Let me mention you can watch it at home. You can go to the theater. There's also a drop-down button that he mentioned a minute ago to gift this movie to an adoptive family. So, Penna, there's just a lot of opportunities for people to watch the trailer, to actually watch the movie, to go to the theater, to give this to other individuals. And so we've provided that link right on Point of View.
Yeah, I would check your local area if you're interested in this movie and see if you can go this weekend, because that's always makes a big statement. But there are all these ways to access the movie, and you can go to pointofview.net and take advantage of all of them. So we encourage you to do that. But, Jeremy, I know that you and I both have seen one of these movies that David made, and, we loved it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as I was saying during the break, I was impressed, David, that you managed to make it all the way through the film, and given that it was Jack Bauer that you were directing through that whole thing. But, no, I love To End All Wars and the redemption story that comes through that, gut-wrenching in many parts of it all, with kind of themes from the bridge over the River Kwai even in there. I mean, I love the whole story, and maybe you have an inside story you're willing to tell on air about Jack and the rest of Kiefer and the rest of the cast members there in that story.
Yeah, I made that movie a while back, also in Hawaii, Two and All Wars, which is really a World War II movie about the power of forgiveness in the face of war, and just how radical and how transforming that concept of forgiveness is. And it was a real joy and privilege to work with Kiefer and Robert Carlyle, Mark Strong, an amazing cast. The Japanese leads were all part of the Kuro Kurosawa's troupe. So it was just a real privilege to direct them, and they all really got into the project and embraced it. They all became very close, the cast did, and it was a really special time.
David,
little known fact that he didn't actually choose Kiefer Sutherland. Jack Bauer chose him for this project, but that's a good thing to have had there. Yeah. I'm also learning that there's a constant theme here. I think I'm going to try out for one of his films because they're all filmed in Hawaii. So yeah, I got to figure that out.
That sounds pretty good to me. Yeah, it certainly does.
We're all volunteering.
Yes, you're welcome to come. You're welcome to come.
Well, David, what are you working on now? I see the name of a movie called The Wind and the Reckoning. Is this also going to be filmed in Hawaii?
It is. You know, it's an action-adventure film that deals with themes of marriage and family, but set in the Western genre. And there were cowboys in Hawaii before they were in Texas.
There were?
Yeah. My Texan family doesn't like me to bring that up. But, yeah, there's a long legacy of Hawaiian cowboys that goes back to the late 1700s. And this takes place in that era, and it's an action-adventure movie. And similar to all my films, I try to bring relevant themes, but put them in a place and a time that perhaps will give you a different perspective of them.
We'll be watching for that one. It's called The Wind and the Reckoning. Gary Sinise, Jim Caviezel, Craig T. Nelson, Jason Scott, a couple of other individuals that you would know as well. But today we're focusing on Running for Grace. Matt Damon, Jim Caviezel, Ryan Potter, to mention just a few individuals. Matt Dillon, excuse me. And again, these are individuals that you will see in the movie. And again, if you would like to know a little bit more, we have a link to that on the website. And we also encourage you to watch the trailer. So either you can go to pointofview.net and find it, or again, runningforgracemovie.com. A 2-minute trailer that I would encourage you to watch, and then maybe pass it on to some other individuals. And if you want to find out if there is a place in your community where you can go to the theater, I clicked on that, and there are places all over the country and many places where we broadcast, including right down the road here, so we could see it right here in Dallas if we want to see it in the theater. So, again, take the time to go to runningforgracemovie.com. And, again, David, thanks for joining us. And next time the next film comes out, let us know.
Thank you. Really appreciate you having me on.
Well, again, that's an opportunity for you to know a little bit more. And we focus so much of time and attention, Penna, on trying to see if we can change the culture. And one of those things is through these movies. So anytime we can affirm a film that people would want to go to and feel good about, that's why we end up talking about some of these films all the time here on Point of View.
Well, Kerby, it is powerful. I think the film industry is a powerful influencer. And we have talked ever since I've been involved with Point of View about movies, but I like the trend that you have implemented here. And that's why I picked up on getting David on when I had the opportunity of bringing the actual filmmaker, the person who either wrote this one and also directed it. But in many cases, it's, an actor or someone who directed or produced the movie, to get them in here too, because their excitement usually comes through. And also we can understand their motivation for doing this. It's a powerful tool to influence the culture. And we want to encourage these filmmakers that are really, rising up.
Well, again,
culture warriors.
Kendrick Brothers, the Fireproof and things like that. The Irwin Brothers, I can only imagine. I mean, I'm just seeing more and more that are actually producing these quality films.
And there's a difference in quality of some of these films as well. And not to say that one is worse than the other or better than the other, but I'm thinking back to End All Wars, and if this movie's anything like to End All Wars, it'll keep you on the edge of your seat, and it'll teach you a very important lesson without you realizing what you're being taught. Really, I mean, there was. In the End All Wars movie, the bad guy in that movie is someone you really wanted to hate, but the movie wouldn't let you. which is very interesting. And you are reminded, as he points out, of this incredible, important theme of forgiveness. When was the last time you saw a blockbuster film about forgiveness?
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. So, Penna, you're exactly right to talk about how even our politics are downstream from culture. And as much talk as we have here at Point of View on a day-to-day basis about the importance of influence in our culture, we have to fight back every day against the reigning cultural influencer, which is Hollywood, and the stuff that's being put out from there that none of us really want our kids being able to see, and yet so many do and learn from. So it's great that we've got guys like David Cunningham that are dedicated to making beautiful-looking films that teach important, transcendent truths that our children can pick up on, regurgitate, and make more of themselves.
Yeah. We had Brian Finn on yesterday. The first project he worked on was one with Michael Jackson, and he's been a stunt coordinator, and he's been involved in all sorts of different aspects of movies. So now that he's an independent film producer, there aren't as many. There aren't hundreds of people out there. You know, like he said, the film he was working on right now out in Utah, just 10 people. So it was good that he learned the craft. But again, he has been in Hollywood all those years and said, you know, I'm tired of feeling like all I can do is curse the darkness. I'm tired of sometimes working on commercials or movies where I know there's a subtle theme that is taking families away from biblical principles. And I don't want to be overt about them, but at the same time, I want to try to counteract some of that. So he's out there producing those as well. And that's just encouraging to see people of that quality with those production values. Because, you know, when you used to say Christian films, you know, eyes would roll a little bit.
Right.
But that's not the case anymore.
No, thankfully. You know, it's the wrong day for this because Lathan Watts should be the guy as your guest today, co-host today, because he's the guy in the office that can remember any line from any film that he's ever seen. And he, I'm sure, would have several lines that have quoted back to David during this interview. But that shows the importance or the
Yes.
gripping power of film, that we do quote our favorite movies and we respond. More people know more lines to movies than they remember scripture verses from their childhood.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a reason why our brain is wired that way to remember these things. Let's put good and important lines back into our minds, even as we quote from Three Amigos once in a while.
Yeah, Three Amigos. You know, and one of the arguments I used to use, and the numbers aren't quite the way they used to be, but there used to be a time when there were about 300,000 churches in the country and about 3,000 movie theaters. Now the numbers are a little different, but, you know, you start thinking about 100-to-1 ratio. But are those 300,000 churches having the same impact as those 3,000 movie theaters? And I think we know the answer to that one. And it's just a good illustration of the power of the visual and the power of movies. And so, again, I'm just grateful that we are starting to see more and more of these individuals. And some of these have been doing it for years. David Cunningham, I mean, that was a 2001 movie, To End All Wars. So, I mean, it's not like he's just a new kid on the block. But, again, some of the production values are getting to the level where they are. They're making their way into the theaters. And so that's really encouraging as well. So let's take a break. Last half hour, let's see if we can talk about what this midterm election will look like and what's at stake, because the Washington Post said the other day, with little fanfare, Trump and McConnell are reshaping the nation's circuit courts. Well, if Democrats take control of the Senate, will that continue? So we have a lot to talk about right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, lots of issues we can still cover, but if you'd like to join us on any of those, we've talked about security clearance, we've talked about religious liberty. Early in the week, of course, we talked about the report from the Catholic Church. Even yesterday, the media strikes back. Those are all other issues. But the second article we've posted on the website is one attempt to try to maybe get a guess, and it is such a guess in August. We all understand that. But a lot of people have been saying that maybe it's 50-50 as to whether or not the Republicans retain control of the House or Democrats actually take control of it. And I've been hearing 50-50. So when I found this one from a reputable source, by the way, of saying that maybe the chances are more 3 and 4, I should say, 74.6%, or basically 75%. That's a little different, and suggesting that if indeed Democrats need 23 Democratic seats to take control, this one might suggest a gain of 35 Democratic seats. So that's the first thing. Then I do want to talk about the Senate, because even if the House turns Democratic, what about the Senate? And this piece that came out the other day in the Washington Post said, while most of the focus has been on Kavanaugh, that is, of course, Brett Kavanaugh, and Justice Neil Gorsuch, the Senate's rapid approval of appellate judges is likely to have its own broad impact in the nation on the 13 circuit courts. It goes on to say there are 179 authorized judgeships in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals with 24 confirmations, 13 vacancies to fill. Trump and the Republicans have the power to install more than 20% of the judges of the nation's second highest courts. Don't think that would continue with a Democratic takeover in the Senate. So what about the House, first of all? In off-year elections, Penna, as you well know, oftentimes the particular political party out of power tends to gain seats. What do you think might happen?
Yes, it does happen that way. And, of course, this forecast from 538, Nate Silver is saying 74.6 likelihood the House is going to go Democrat. It's really, every single one of these races is geographical in a sense, so it's really hard to look at the whole. But he's counting them, and he's using the statistics. And so I don't know. It's very interesting. I think one of the biggest factors in it is how far left the Democrats are going. And you kind of wonder if those rules that have applied in most off-year elections are going to apply again, because the Democrats are so far to the left.
Doubling down, right?
They are doubling down on socialism, basically. And, and the other factor, of course, is Donald Trump and Trump hatred, which is supposed to be fueling this forecast that the Democrats are going to take over.
Which was supposed to fuel the ascendancy of Hillary Clinton as well.
Right. So, personally, if I had to make a prediction myself, and I don't have all the graphs and numbers in my brain, I think that the Republicans could still hold the House at this point. And I hope they do. But if they don't, it's the Senate. I think that when we talk judges, which is a key issue for a lot of believers across the country, that's an area where there's even a possibility for pickups for Republicans in the Senate.
Yeah, and we'll get to the Senate in just a minute, but I'd love to get Jeremy's comments. I was looking also at one of our callers who wants to talk about the courts, but I want to get your comments before I get to some of my callers here, so go ahead.
No problem.
Yeah.
No, look, I remember 2 years ago sitting around this very table inside this booth saying, well, I guess we shouldn't trust polls anymore.
Yes.
We were clear that at that point that polls were, not quite accurate. In fact, I saw a tweet today, as a matter of fact, with this very graphic that you have on this ABC News poll from Nate Silver and the 538 group. It had that on one side, and the other one said, where have I seen this before? I'm sensing a red wave. And it was the poll from just before the 2016 election that said about the same thing for the blue side. On that survey as well. So, look, I don't know what'll happen in November. I don't think it's going to be a blue wave, as in some giant tidal wave that's going to come crashing down. At best, it might be a blue ripple that goes across the country. It just depends on how much they follow my advice on the left there and bring out April Ocasio-Cortez to every single stump speech they can. I think that is a brilliant strategy on the Democrats' part to make sure that she goes and endorses every candidate across the nation as often as she possibly can, and they put her on TV as much as they possibly can talking about her plans. Yeah. Isn't that a great idea? Mm-hmm. I think that, look, if Democratic strategists, if you're listening, bring her to Texas to talk with Beto O'Rourke. He needs her down here in Texas to push him across the finish line. It's an important part of this campaign.
As a matter of fact, just a week or two ago, we did the analysis of all the various candidates that were endorsed by Bernie Sanders, and I think you only had one or two. Alexia Ocasio-Cortez was 0 for whatever the number was. I forget what the number was. So everyone she endorsed lost. So.
I love that. My favorite moment was when she was campaigning for someone, and they did a little quick video. Yeah, I'm here in whatever state, we're going to turn this seat red.
Yes. She was supposed to say blue, but yes, I know that one.
What was the color of the communist flag again? I'm just trying to...
Just so funny. Now, if indeed Democrats control the House and Republicans still retain control of the Senate, I think the word gridlock really comes to mind as well. Now, if Democrats control the House, I'm thinking, of course, impeachment hearings for Donald Trump, maybe calling for massive investigations of every Trump cabinet officer and things of that nature, an attempt to abolish ICE, maybe even trying to pass Medicare for all. What are some thoughts about what that might look like?
Reversing the tax cuts.
Yeah. Those are just a couple of things. So again,
I think the
what's
best
at
thing we
stake?
can hope for is gridlock in that situation, right? That the Senate is retained. But at the same time that the president, if he stays, well, he will stay there through at least 2020, that make sure he's using the power of that veto pen very, very effectively. And then to circle back at the beginning of our conversation today at the 1 o'clock hour, that this task force of the Department of Justice becomes all that more important from my perspective to make sure that if we're not going to have more and better laws being put in place to protect religious liberty, that the laws we currently have in place are well executed within the executive department itself. So, look, I think the media is very excited at all the prospects that may come out under a Democratic-led House of Representatives, but they've got a long way to go in proving that will actually be the case. The polls last time were way, way off. And don't forget, the president right now maintains around a 50% approval rating. Love or hate him, and that seems to be about 1 for 1 right now across the country, literally, according to those approval numbers. The 50 or even 48% rate of approval right now, that's enormous during the midterm election. I mean, typically that's down closer to the 30%, at least from my recollection of things. But to be at around 50% for as much beating up as he's received in the press and on his own Twitter feed, it's pretty remarkable that he's up at 50% right now. Love him or hate him, he's still pretty popular.
Look, we're talking about this now. We're analyzing it. People are polling it. Most of the nation is not paying attention to the election. It's not a presidential year.
Labor Day, yeah.
This is an off-year election. Average Americans don't pay, especially during the summer months. Yeah. Once the summer's over and you're getting into, final 6 weeks, 4 weeks, that's when maybe we can believe some polls. But even then, I mean, the ads come fast and furious. You start being educated. You start understanding things. And I think because of Alexia
Ocasio-Cortez.
Because of her and because of just this trend of Democrats just moving to the extreme left on so many things. And Republicans will start putting that in ads. You're going to start having quotes and you're going to start laughing at her and some of her stupid statements. And, I just think that's going to change the equation.
I don't think so. Let me also put the issue of the Senate on there. Of course, I see we might get some calls on the courts themselves. And if the Senate stays Republican, then you continue moving down the road. And I just the other day saw that the Senate advancing the nominations of Marvin Quattlebaum and Julius Ness Richardson to the Fourth Circuit Court. Now, it used to be that we talked about the most liberal court was the Ninth Circuit Court. I still think it is, but the Fourth Circuit Court's right up there, isn't it?
Don't forget, that's where Bladensburg came out of our memorial that we have before the Supreme Court of the United States right now, where we had in argument one of the judges there suggest that we just simply resolve the issue by cutting the horizontal arms off this cross-shaped Veterans Monument. No, we're not going to desecrate a Veterans Memorial in that manner, Your Honor. Yes, you're exactly right, Kerby. This has been a huge change in the court in the last couple of years. It used to be called the Rocket Docket, a very conservative court, the Fourth Circuit, I mean. But right now they seem to be in heavy competition with the Ninth Circuit to see how far left they might actually go. It concerns me. We actually have oral arguments in October before the Fourth Circuit on a case. So, look, this is good news that we've got 2 new judges up there on the Fourth Circuit right now. Let's hope that we have more that will come. But the article's greater point is that the president's legacy in the first 2 years of his term has been to get these positions filled.
Who would have ever guessed that you would have so many come through? And the impact, that's the long-term impact, because these are lifetime appointments, right?
That's right, and good on Mitch McConnell and the rest of the leadership there to have made that happen and make that possible. This will be felt for a long time and in a good, freedom-loving sort of way.
Again, we'll open the phones and take your calls right after these important messages. 1-800-351-1212.
Two recent news stories converge to demonstrate how a fully functioning, vibrant economy depends upon a culture of life. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that job openings in the U.S. climbed to 6.7 million in the 3 months ended in June, the highest level since 2001. The number of unfilled jobs is growing in nearly every industry. The Journal explains that an expanding economy that demands more labor, combined with a historically low unemployment rate, has resulted in a situation where there just aren't enough workers in fields such as transportation, warehousing, and utilities. Combine that with a story summarizing a paper published in 2016 in the Open Journal of Preventive Medicine. National Right to Life posted the piece on its news site last week under the headline, "Abortion by far is the leading cause of death." A team of researchers from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte compared abortions from 2009 with other measured causes of death that year. Although abortions are not classified as deaths in U.S. vital statistics, these researchers considered them so, stating that the exclusion of abortion as a major cause of death should be a major concern to the scientific community and society as a whole. They found that induced abortion caused nearly 1.2 million deaths, almost twice the deaths attributed to heart disease, and more than twice those attributed to cancer. The National Right to Life story's author observed that abortion, unlike natural or accidental death, is intentional killing. So, when the Wall Street Journal reports that unfilled jobs are piling up, we have to conclude that we have taken the lives of workers we need in today's economy. Sure, some of these children, had they been born, would have ended up a net drain on the American economy, but most would have been contributors and taxpayers. With over 1 million abortions per year, we're missing a lot of workers. Shouldn't policymakers want to know? For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, it is our weekend edition. Let me just mention next week, though, we got Michael Flannery with us and Gary Frazier, O.S. Hawkins, Kay Wyma. Tony Junji will be with us. I want to see if he has any comments about Coach Joe Kennedy. So, as a matter of fact, Tony Junji will be in studio, so we'll talk about some of those issues next week. But let's get to some phone calls. We'll head out to California first. I think, David, you want to talk about the courts, so go for it.
Oh, thanks, Kerby and Penna, and is it Jeremy?
Yeah. Jeremy, yes.
Yeah, good to meet you. A couple of things. Out here in California for a number of years, America is supposed to be set up with a tripartite set of government so that no dictator comes to power. And so there's legislative, executive, and judicial, right? So the judicial branch has been intentionally starved by the budget process coming from legislative, and sometimes the president agrees. And so they've been starving the courts at various times. Various counties, various states, various regions have been starved in the past, and huge financial losses to America we the taxpayers own all of the BLM land. We own the rivers. We own the skies. And if somebody's allowed to weaken a section of America by budget process, and then there's no judicial oversight of whether a theft happens. For example, those Bundys down there in Arizona, in Nevada, didn't they capture basically 600,000 acres and nobody did a thing about it for 40 years? That's pretty amazing looting of America's assets. And the idea that starving the courts is a very important problem. And one of the first things that Trump did when he came into office was to fire 48 U.S. district attorneys at once, kick them out of their offices that night. They could not fulfill any further obligations to the duties of office, and he left those unstaffed for months. And then he's replaced them basically with organized crime and big polluters and corporate monsters, who now run the courts. His new U.S. district attorney appointments are pretty evil people. The guy that is appointed to take care of Superfund in America is a fraudulent banker, banned from banking for life. And this guy gets appointed to manage the finances of Superfund cleanups of hazardous wastes in America. This is a pretty evil plan. And so I'm just wondering if you're familiar with this problem of starving the courts and then making sure that when they do a looting of America, they get away with it solid.
Okay, Jeremy?
Well, the biggest starvation I think we see on the courts right now is just simply empty benches across the country. And that's not because of a budget shortfall or budget games that the Congress may be playing. It's simply because there is a Senate that has refused to vote on well-qualified candidates that have passed the Judiciary Committee, and are waiting for a vote in the Senate. We've got, I think it's over 100 seats right now that are vacant across this country. That is incredible when you think about it. There are 500,000 lawsuits, civil lawsuits filed every single year. There's criminal ones in addition to that. That's a lot of legal. There are backups, about 400 cases per judge right now that they're carrying on their dockets on things. There's a lot of things that are going on, especially when it concerns your civil rights and your religious liberty at the district court level. I have a colleague in my office who's been waiting since December of last year to have a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. He's qualified. He's ready to move to Amarillo to take up the bench over there. Just needs to go through the Senate there. But because the Democrats are willing to slow down the judicial system, and let's be very clear, to slow down justice for people across this country, that's not being filled right now. That's unacceptable. So I hope that we will begin to feed the courts with good judges that are going to interpret the Constitution according to the manner the Founding Fathers wanted it to be read as.
So this month it was supposed to be happening for senators were supposed to be staying back in D.C., and also there's been a lot of attention on this 30-hour rule. And so do you know where that's gone? Have they been able to speed it up at all in recent weeks?
Well, I know that it's moving along. That's about all I know, and that the Senate is still committed to making sure that these benches are filled. And while I'm critical, I'm thankful. Look, the circuit courts have been well filled. We just had 2 more this week. Those are huge numbers for 2 years, and it takes a monumental lift by the Senate leadership to make those happen. I'm just saying there are many more that are out there. There's another wrench, of course, which is a good wrench to throw into the business here, which is Judge Kavanaugh being elevated to the Supreme Court. That has necessarily taken away a whole lot of attention from the lower court positions as well. Probably necessarily. That's a big deal. We're going to see those hearings, I think, the first week or so of September, where the Judge Kavanaugh will be up for his confirmation hearings. Despite the protestations of Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein and others, I suspect that Judge Feinstein, goodness sakes, Judge Kavanaugh will be elevated to the Supreme Court right around the first or second week of the sitting of the court in October.
Let's take another phone call. Again, that's probably the other call we'll take right now. William in Texas, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Where would I begin? First comment on Brennan. The reason that they keep the former CIA people in the loop is so they can be consulted for, if you have an upcoming crisis. And
right.
One of the gentlemen earlier said that, well, if this was something that happened during their watch, it's useful to be able to go back and pick their brain. That's one thing, but there's also another component of the fact that they can provide insights to other foreign sources. Like they may know someone, if they're contacting, say, hey, contact this person in this government or that agency with that particular government. They're a wealth of information, and it's useful to keep them in the loop. Now, I don't know that Brennan has monetized in any way. Yeah, he said stuff about Trump, but I don't see him monetizing it. And are you aware that the admiral that's nonpartisan who did the bin Laden raid is now backing Brennan in being against Trump and offering to resign his?
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, and there have been a number that have written a letter actually calling for the president to reverse his decision. And, of course, we've had some that have gone the other way. But I think by and large, the reaction from the intelligence community and those who served as FBI, CIA, all have been pretty much upset by what Donald Trump has done. Fair?
Yeah, that's fair. That's understandable in a sense. They'd like to retain theirs.
Yes. So, again, we'll see. One of the things that the president did say is he wanted to reevaluate that idea of keeping your security clearance in perpetuity. So we'll see whether or not this is a one-off in terms of John Brennan or something else changes. But that's all we got for today. Let me just mention before we run out of time, there are a couple of things that we always do want to give you as action items. One of those is we had David Cunningham talking about his new film, Running for Grace. So let me encourage you to click on his particular link, and that will take you to runningforgracemovie.com, and there is a trailer. Then let me also mention that if you click on the picture there of Jeremy, you will take it to First Liberty. There's a way you can find out a little bit more about what's happened to Chaplain Scott Squires and Casey Griffin. We also have the article about the individual that was threatened with being removed, which is still amazing to me, from that particular location in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So that's there. And most importantly, Jeremy, you're looking for a few coaches to get out there on the 50-yard line and say a prayer, aren't you?
Friday night lights are going to start lighting up here pretty soon. So be like Coach Kennedy. Wait till the game is over. Your responsibilities are done. Go to the 50-yard line and take a knee in silent prayer. 15, 30 seconds. You don't have to say anything out loud, but let somebody take a picture of you, maybe.
Yeah. So, again, we're simply out of time. Again, it is a weekend. Don't forget that we have Tony Dungy here next week. We'll see if he has something. See you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.